Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Rahim Kalamli for my 2 Cents podcast. As you know, we have been doing a series in the last 2-3 months where we are inviting specialists, executives, really cool people. I think they are really cool to talk a little bit around their expertise and share the information with the wider audience. For this week, I'm going to talk to Saurabh. Saurabh is an executive. Well, let's do it differently. Maybe you can introduce yourself before I start cutting the grass in front of you. Saurabh, can you tell the people who you are, what you do, what your background is?
Sure. Thank you, Rahim, for introducing me to this platform of my 2 cents. And just to introduce myself and the business, which I represent. My name is Saurabh Gurkumar. I am based in Barcelona, and I'm the executive director and shareholder of a small molecule active pharmaceutical ingredient business called Uquify, which has manufacturing in Spain, Mexico, Hungary, and we have been more than an 8-year-old plus brand in Europe in our business. To introduce myself, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, born and raised and educated to a large extent in India, and clearly I started my initial professional career in the financial services as an investment banker and then a professional investor myself before I switched tracks to join the pharmaceutical business, and it's been nearly 8 years now. So that's a bit about myself and the company I represent, and we're happy to tell you a bit more about our business as we move forward, Rahim.
Cool. You mentioned a small company, but you guys are not really that small.
Well, I meant a small molecule API company because in our business you have small molecules and large molecules. But you're right. I mean, we are a reasonable size company. In fact, I would say that in our sector, which is manufacture of active ingredients for pharmaceutical applications, we're probably within the top 10 in terms of Europe. And the European Union headquarters, given that we are based in Barcelona, and it's a team of 850 people across 4 countries.
So it's actually quite large, as I mentioned. Well, when in our preparation we were talking about what's happening in your business, and we got talking about the impact of COVID on your business. Can you tell me a little bit around what happened when COVID hit your organization and how you guys had to act as an organization to what was happening around you?
Right. So, Rahim, since we are a active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing company, manufacturing is our core, and we make product and we sell it from our manufacturing sites, which are 2 in Spain, 1 in Mexico, 1 in Hungary. And our end markets, are US and Europe, which is more than 70% of the sales, which our business generates. When COVID started last year, I think around February, March, maybe March is probably more relevant time frame. Our businesses, in terms of manufacturing, remained functional completely throughout the period because clearly we're classified as an essential industry in all the countries which we operate in. So our manufacturing sites, were running, but clearly we had constraints in terms of the precautions, which we sort of had to take to deal with this epidemic. So the last, I would say, 14, 15 months have been challenging. I think our workforces have been adapting to all the social distancing protocols and the appropriate COVID behavior on the sites. Off the sites, of course, we've offered work from home options extensively. Sometimes it works, but for all sorts of roles, it's not really the most ideal scenario. So it's been a sort of a mixed bag, I would say, in terms of the non-manufacturing functions. But to I think the industry's credit and generally our workforce's credit as well, I think we have sort of adapted to the new normal and moved ahead. To tell you a bit about the impact of COVID on our business and our sector, we are obviously in step with pharmaceuticals, and clearly that has been an area or a sector of focus, especially because it is so basic, to mankind and basic to societies. and it has found a lot of flavor and interest in the last 17, 18 months. I think a couple of trends, Rahim, sort of have amplified themselves. If I could use the word,
Yeah.
is most of the business of pharmaceuticals. If you look at the life cycle, or if you look at the value chain of the pharma business, it starts from active intermediates, basic chemicals, moves to advanced intermediates and APIs, and then eventually they're converted to finished drug products like tablets, capsules, ointments, which you and I, consume as patients, right? And the supply chain for most of the precursors of the drug product, uh, over a period of last, I would say 25, 30 years, has predominantly sort of moved to the east because of cost, and because of environment issues. And I think what this pandemic sort of amplified is in certain essential medicines, there has to be a balance, and there has to be an element of uh, self sustainability, for countries in the West, for like the US and Europe. And I think that's what the governments have sort of realized and societies have realized. So you are seeing more emphasis on trying to encourage local manufacture of active pharmaceutical ingredients, local manufacture of drug products, for a range of therapies, which over a period of time have sort of in terms of supply chain risk or supply chain concentration, move to the other side of the world. So I think that is clearly a factor which is, uh, I would say, positive in terms of a macro environment for companies like us, which are based in Europe, which are based in North America in terms of manufacturing. So clearly, that's a trend which we can clearly spot, and I'm sure we will not be the only people. It's probably across our sector. And the second point, which I would sort of like to mention, is clearly the drugs, or the application areas which are relevant to COVID have taken off in a large manner because consumption has gone up, demand has gone up, etc. But outside of that, depending on which therapy you're sort of catering to, the consumption of drugs has sort of not been uniformly going up across all therapy areas, because people have been confined, they have picked up lesser infections, etc. So this is the feedback which we hear increasingly from our customers, who are based in US and Europe. And I think that's also a certain nuance, when you talk about pharma and life sciences.
So basically, what you're saying is we're seeing a major shift in the type of use of drugs versus before the COVID. Um, I myself have been working for an organization, a data organization, where one of our pillars was global supply chain, a really important pillar as an organization. We support organizations with data linked to tier one, tier two, tier three suppliers. You actually touched something when you were mentioning that from a European perspective, we see that governments, but also organizations, are looking at sustainability, local, domestic sustainability. But at the same time, from experience and from some numbers I've been reading recently, we see that still a lot of pharmaceutical companies, medical equipment companies, do not really have a grip on their supplier base, and predominantly on the risk they're running, the financials, the operations, etc. How do you feel pharmaceutical organizations, organizations like you, will need to adapt in the next few years when we are changing the way we supply, we design our supply chain end to end?
Right. I think what at least we have been doing, since we fall actually, if you look at the value chain, we fall bang in the middle of our industry, right? So because we have a lot of interface with our buyers, that's our customers, and also our suppliers whom we purchase product from. I think what you would increasingly see people adopt is risk management when it comes to thinking about their supply chains, and this is clearly something which we see firsthand. So you would like to have multiple sources of manufacture in your product, and especially in as regulatorily intensive a business as pharmaceuticals, where the approval of registrations has its own timeline, changes to suppliers has its own timeline. I think people who are trying to develop new registrations or bring new drugs to market would probably become much more think ahead and make sure that they're placing more than one source of manufacture in their supply chain, even if the drug is at a very sort of a nascent stage of development, either as a new
Hmm.
chemical entity or as a generic product. So I think people would definitely give more emphasis and weightage to uh, the geodiversity of their supply chain, and clearly that has a rub off impact on us as well, because we would expect to do the same of our suppliers. So that's
Hmm.
what we have done. We have consciously over the last I would say 18 24 months tried to work with suppliers in different parts of the globe, so that we are much more nimble and able to respond to any such circumstances, because it's just not the COVID, right, Rahim? I think what's
Hmm.
happened also is that there have been unusual weather events in North America. For
Hmm.
example, earlier this year, all that happened in Texas, and then there was also an event in Europe. So these are also things which have disrupted supply chains in the whole fine chem industry, and sectors like us which use fine chem as feedstock. So
Hmm.
given all these things happening together, even though they are distinct events, it definitely makes a lot of sense for companies to plan their supply chains much more uh, consciously of all these factors which can happen. And clearly automation,
Hmm.
transportation, these are also trends which I think people will lay a lot of emphasis on going forward. Because what we have seen
Hmm.
firsthand is that the regulators over the last 2 3 years have, depending on the nature of the drug product which is in question here, tried to implement the GDP, like good distribution practices. I think
Hmm.
everybody's heard of GMP, which is good manufacturing practices in our sector. But I think GDP as a trend also is something which the regulators are encouraging all industry players to follow. And I think along with the GMP, GDP will also become a clear sort of a regulatory differentiator when you're looking at companies.
Well, I guess the pharmaceuticals, especially that sector of business, is really regulated. How would you do you cope with the, let's say, I'm going to say, diverse world we live in? You have seen what has been happening the last few years in the US with the former president, not naming names, but people know who I'm talking about. What's happening currently in Europe with things like Brexit, et cetera, et cetera. You see that countries are adapting rules and regulations more in a more domestic space. How does that impact you guys? Because it also impacts probably the supply chain, but also your organization.
Correct. And I think, I mean, clearly, I mean, when these events happened and companies understood the supply chain risks which they were taking, or economies and countries understood the supply chain risks they were buying, there was a lot of incentive to promote local manufacture, etc., etc. And the governments started to announce packages and incentives for people to start doing. But the reality, Rahim, also is that it doesn't happen overnight. You cannot set up a pharmaceutical plant or a fine chem plant over 6 9 months. Definitely not in Europe or US. Given all the multiple
Mhm.
regulations needed. So I think there has to be a balance. I think the phase one would be try to have a smarter supply chain so that you're able to take the extreme risk off the table in the first instance, and then incentivize local manufacturers where they can have a business which generates a return on capital. Because clearly anybody who's looking to invest money and set up a business would do it if there is a business case. So there have to be some drivers or pulls of the business model as well. And I
Mhm.
think we have to see that part sort of play out as to whether actually does local capacity emerge in an area like, I don't know, antibiotics or cephalosporins, or gastrointestinal or inhalation
Mhm.
drugs, where typically so far the manufacturing has been less in the west vis-a-vis the east. So we will have to see how that actually plays out. And but clearly I think people will uh, choose the products, will choose the scripts which they are strong in, and
Mhm.
then obviously try to make a business case of it, and try to bring those drugs to market. So we'll have to, I mean, my view is it has to play out. there's a lot of positive news. There's a lot of positive noise
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what people want out of pharmaceutical companies or API companies in Europe and US. And we'll have to see how that evolves in a real life scenario.
Nice. So we touched a bit on the risk. We talked a bit around regulatory compliance part of what's happening in your business. If I recently read an article, or an article, basically a document from McKinsey, where they mentioned that with all the volatility in the world, they expect that pharmaceutical companies will at least lose 24 to between 24 and 38% of their revenue in the next 10 years due to floods, due to environmental stuff, due to economical stuff, etc., etc. This is a big amount, 24%. If I look at the numbers currently being registered as revenue. If you look towards the future, we have been looking a bit to the past, but if you now look towards the future, what would for you be the top things pharmaceutical companies need to start working on as a preparation towards the future state of their organizations?
Sure. I think, yeah, I mean, the number you mentioned, I have not read the report, but the number you mentioned does look significant. We'll have to see how they compute the number, because I'm sure all other sectors also run an equal, if not higher, risk of erosion in sales, as business cycles progress. But to answer your specific question as to how do companies like us think about our future, or how do customers think about their future? I think we operate in two segments, right? And I think this will probably be an interesting sort of segue, for the audience. Is we clearly, our traditional business, has been the fact that we are a generic sort of active ingredient manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we supply generic products, and we have customers, who are marketing these drug products which are off patent. This has been our traditional business of Uquify for nearly 75 years of evolution. And I would say in the last 7 to 8 years, we've also added a new business segment, which is where we offer similar development and manufacturing services, but we offer them to innovator companies. That is, companies who are trying to bring new drugs to market or bring new innovations to market. So when you ask me the question as to how our sector should think, I think there are two distinct answers. One, depending on which customer base you're looking at. If you would talk about the traditional Uquify business, where we were positioned with generic companies, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
I think our customers, and consequently us, we would think more about launching new products, right, which go off patent
Mm-hmm.
whenever they go off patent as per the patent life cycle. And clearly, the number of filings which we would do per year would be a key sort of driver as to how we would like to think about the future, because that is the starting point of a business development plan, which trickles down to project management, which trickles down to R&D, and eventually to manufacturing. So new product introduction, or filing of new generic products is I think would be the key way we would approach things. If you would look at the other side of the business, which is companies who are trying to bring innovative products to market, which is the second business segment which we cater to, I think there the criteria would also clearly be bringing new drugs to market, but bringing new innovative drugs to market. And I think what I feel is that the biotech spending, or the biotech investment, which has been happening in US predominantly, has been pretty robust for the last 5-7 years. There's been a lot of emphasis, and many companies have got well funded, Series A, Series B, Series C. So all that capital which has been raised in terms of companies trying to bring new drugs to market, that is trickling down, and it finds obviously place in the supply chain, and companies like us, do development work and manufacturing work for all these companies. So I think the biotech spending environment has been robust. And I think, basis of that, we are trying to see new drugs to market. So what our customers will look for at this point is execution, right? And the execution is basically, if you're able to get an IND filing in time, or if you're able to get a drug into phase 1, phase 2, and basically trying to you know crunch the conventional timeline of coming to market. And here is where the newer concepts which will probably emerge, like artificial intelligence and machine learning, come into uh, question or come into application for our customers. Because I think we have seen firsthand quite a few companies, especially in US and Europe, increasingly trying to use those tools to compress what is conventionally an extremely long cycle in terms of time, in terms of capital for drug development, right? So clearly they're using in pilots, or in some cases for go no go scenarios, for sequencing of genomes, etc. They are using increasingly these concepts of AI, ML, what you would like to call it. So I think we see those two macro trends happening. The innovators are clearly trying to bring new drugs to market. At the same time, they're working very innovatively of how to sort of compress the development life cycle and increase the risk reward benefit. I think that is their priority, and that's obviously trickling down to us because we are part of the supply chain for them. And on the conventional off-patent drugs, you're seeing companies continuously thinking about how to bring new drugs to market, and here time and cost position is of essence.
Nice,
which
nice.
is a bit different from how innovator would look at things.
Yeah. Well, it has a lot of similarities with other segments, but what I've learned for today is that the segment you guys are working is actually really different from a lot of segments I've been working in, sectors I've been working in. I've actually just one last question in line of the discussion we had today. This is actually related to what we have seen this year in respect to the time to market from development to actually bringing it to market. We have seen a really fast time to market on the COVID vaccines, especially in the UK, but also all over the world, from the time they started actually developing up till they brought it into market. This speed of making the decision, testing, getting it through all the cycles, etc., etc. What do we expect will happen for other types of drugs in the nearby future? Is this an example, and is this a way for pharmaceutical organizations to now start pushing drugs faster into market? Or do you think this was just because it was so urgent with the COVID? For future new development of drugs, it will still take a lot of time before we get through the cycle of approval.
I hope the latter happens. That is conventional drug development for all therapies. The time cycle does compress in terms of development, approval, commercialization, etc. But we'll have to see how it plays out, because bringing a new drug to market, you have to follow all the protocols required in terms of safety studies, and that's the gamut. I don't think any regulator will sort of try to change that and compromise product safety. But at the same time, I think what the incredible work which scientists have put in over the last 18 months or so across companies shows us that when there is a crisis, there is definitely willpower and strength to respond. So I'm sure that companies will now try to look at things from the perspective that, okay, if we could do this for COVID, in 18 months, maybe is there something else which we need to do a bit differently for, I don't know, bringing a new Alzheimer's drug to market, which is something which I think the patient community is very, very keenly looking for, because that is a treatment area along with different types of oncology products, where there is a huge deficit in terms of new innovation. Yeah. So I think people will definitely look at how they could improve themselves, and at the same time, given the needs of the patient community, we hope that the regulators will also adapt whatever is possible, from a risk management perspective.
Nice. Well, that basically concludes the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you would like to share with the people who are watching or listening to our podcast? Your 2 cents on.
No, I think it was great to interact with you, Rahim, and also get a window onto your community. And hopefully, I mean, we can only wish, from my perspective, that everybody sort of stays safe, takes all the right precautions in terms of COVID appropriate behavior, and let's all try to make sure that we get vaccinated at the earliest opportunity, because that's the best way we can tide over this situation.
For the people who are listening to my 2 Cent podcast, if you have questions related to, for instance, supply chain challenges, or you want to learn more about what Saurabh does with his organization, do not hesitate to contact me and I will bring you into contact. Because I think that listening to Saurabh, he has so much experience in this segment, and not only this, but also in investing, and etc., that he's a great connection to talk to if you are in need of some advice or suggestions, etc., etc. So Saurabh, thank you for joining. It was a real pleasure having you in the podcast, and I want to wish you a really, really lovely evening. I understand that you still have some additional calls, so you're going to be busy. Signing off from Barcelona. This time we're both from Barcelona. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining. And next week we'll have a new session.
Thank you very much, Ray.